Many women make the same mistake when a man leaves. They panic, they call, they text, they explain, they try to remind him of memories, they beg him to reconsider, and sometimes they even fight harder when they discover he is already giving attention to someone else. But what they don't realize is that chasing someone who has chosen distance rarely brings them closer. In fact, it often does the opposite. It gives him comfort. It gives him certainty that no matter what he does, you'll still be there, waiting, hoping, and sacrificing your peace for his attention. And certainty kills appreciation, because when someone knows they can have you whenever they want, they stop feeling the weight of losing you. They stop wondering, they stop missing you. They stop questioning their decisions because your constant presence protects them from experiencing the consequences of your absence. That's why the first thing you must do is stop chasing and disappear from his emotional radar. Not because you're playing games, not because you're trying to manipulate him, but because you deserve to step out of the role of someone begging for love and return to being someone who knows their value. Silence is powerful because it forces reality to speak. The moment you stop sending messages, stop checking on him, stop trying to convince him, something unexpected begins to happen. The noise disappears, and suddenly he is left alone with his own thoughts. He starts wondering why you aren't reaching out. He starts noticing the empty spaces where your presence used to be. He starts asking himself if you're moving on. And while he may not admit it immediately, curiosity begins to replace certainty. Most men expect emotional pursuit after a breakup. They expect anger, tears, explanations, and desperate attempts to hold on. But when they are met with dignity, calmness, and silence, it unsettles them. Not because you are hurting them intentionally, but because, for the first time, they have to face life without your constant energy surrounding them. Meanwhile, your focus must shift away from him. Not toward another man, not toward revenge, but toward yourself peacefully. Spend time with people who genuinely care about you. Reconnect with your dreams. Exercise smile again. Learn to enjoy your own company. Something beautiful happens when you stop making him the center of your universe. You begin to remember who you were before you became obsessed with keeping someone who was willing to walk away. And strangely enough, that is often when he begins paying attention again. Not because you begged, not because you competed with another woman, but because he notices something he didn't expect. He notices your absence. He notices your strength. He notices that life continues without him. And for the first time, he realizes that the woman he thought would always chase him has become silent, peaceful, and unavailable. That silence speaks louder than 1,000 emotional messages ever could. Because people rarely appreciate what is constantly pursuing them. They appreciate what they are afraid of losing. And when you stop chasing, you don't lose your power. You finally reclaim it. And that's where everything begins to change. One of the biggest mistakes people make after losing someone they love is believing that the answer is to convince that person to come back. They spend their days analyzing every message, comparing themselves to the new person in his life, wondering what she has that they don't. They start believing that if they can just say the right words, prove their love one more time, or become who he wants them to be, everything will return to the way it was. But here's the truth most people discover too late. You cannot compete with someone else by chasing. You cannot win love by begging. And you certainly cannot build lasting attraction by abandoning yourself instead of asking, how do I get him back? Ask a more powerful question. How do I become the version of myself that I almost forgot while loving someone else? Because many men don't fully understand the value of a woman while she is always available. They assume her love will always be there. They assume her kindness, loyalty, and support are permanent. They become comfortable. They stop appreciating. And sometimes they walk away believing that what they have lost can easily be replaced. But life has a strange way of teaching lessons that words never can. People often realize the value of something only after they no longer have access to it. That's why this season of your life is not about proving your worth to him. It's about rediscovering your worth for yourself. Take care of your body, not to make him jealous, but because you deserve to feel healthy and confident. Take care of your mind. Read more. Learn something new. Build dreams that don't depend on someone else's approval. Laugh again. Travel if you can. Reconnect with old friends. Spend time with family, peace in moments that have nothing to do with relationships. Like noise rather than music. Because people don't truly understand value through speeches. They understand value through experience. That's why so many women exhaust themselves trying to make a man feel guilty or convince him that he's making a mistake. They argue, they cry, they list all the sacrifices they've made. They hope that one more emotional conversation will suddenly awaken something inside him. But love rarely works that way. The truth is, what changes people isn't hearing complaints. It's feeling absence. It's waking up one day and realizing that the person who always cared is no longer there. It's reaching for comfort and finding silence. It's going through stressful moments and noticing that the voice that once brought peace has disappeared. Because memories are strange. They don't usually become powerful while someone is constantly present. Memories become powerful when reality starts making comparisons. And comparison is something you should never force. Life will do it naturally. You don't have to remind him that you understood him. Life will remind him. You don't have to tell him that you were loyal. Time will reveal it. You don't have to convince him that your love was special. Reality has a way of exposing what is ordinary and what was rare. That's why your greatest strength right now is not to speak louder. It's to become quieter. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because some lessons can only be learned through experience. Perhaps he's with someone else right now. Maybe everything seems exciting and new. Maybe he believes he has found something better. And that's okay, because newness often creates illusions. But eventually, life returns to normal, the excitement fades, differences appear, challenges arise. And when those ordinary moments arrive, something interesting happens. People unconsciously compare. Not because they want to, but because memories begin whispering. He remembers how you supported him. He remembers the way you listened. He remembers how peaceful your conversations were. He remembers the little things he once considered ordinary. And suddenly, what he took for granted begins to look extraordinary. But here's the mistake many women make. The moment they notice signs that he's thinking about them, they rush back into his life with explanations, questions, and emotional conversations. And they interrupt the process. They stop him from truly feeling the difference, because regret needs space, memories need silence, and comparison needs time. You don't have to fight with the woman he's with. You don't have to prove you're better. You don't have to post messages trying to make him jealous. You simply continue growing, continue healing, and continue protecting your peace. Because if what you shared was real, life itself will become the messenger, not your words, not your tears, not your complaints. And one day, when the noise fades and reality speaks louder than excitement, he may finally understand something. He couldn't understand while you were still trying to convince him. That some people are not appreciated while they are present. They are appreciated when their absence becomes impossible to ignore. And that's when regret begins to whisper what love once tried to say. One of the most painful experiences a woman can face is discovering that the man she loves has chosen someone else. Nothing wounds the heart quite like realizing that the person who once promised forever is now giving his attention, his energy, and perhaps even his affection to someone new. And in moments like these, fear whispers dangerous things. Fear tells you to compete. Fear tells you to prove that you're better. Fear tells you to stay available, hoping that one day he'll recognize your value in return. But love that requires you to abandon your dignity is never worth the price. Because the moment you begin competing for a place in someone's life, you have already forgotten something important. You were never created to be an option. You were never meant to stand in line while someone decides whether you're enough. And you were never meant to convince someone to choose you while they're busy exploring someone else. Many women believe that patience means waiting with open arms while he figures out what he wants. They tell themselves that if they love him enough, he'll eventually realize his mistake. So they answer every message immediately. They remain emotionally available. They accept crumbs of attention. They allow themselves to become a backup plan while he enjoys the excitement of another relationship. But that isn't love. That's self-abandonment. Because love without self-respect becomes suffering. Understand this. A man who knows he can leave, explore other options, and still return whenever he pleases never truly feels the weight of losing you. Why would he? In his mind, you're still waiting. You're still available. You're still willing to accept whatever version of him comes back. And certainty destroys appreciation. That's why boundaries are not punishment. Boundaries are self-respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to say, I care about you, but I will not stand here competing for your attention. I will not fight another woman for a position that should never require a battle. Because when you refuse to become an option, something powerful happens. You send a message without speaking. You tell him that your love is valuable. You tell him that access to your heart is not guaranteed. You tell him that losing you has consequences. And perhaps at first he won't understand. Perhaps he'll believe you'll eventually come back. Perhaps he'll think you'll always be waiting. But life has a way of surprising people. Because while he's busy chasing excitement, you're busy protecting your peace. While he's trying to decide what he wants, you're deciding what you deserve. And one day he may begin asking himself difficult questions. Why isn't she fighting for me? Why isn't she begging? How can she let go so calmly? But the answer is simple, because self-respect is stronger than desperation, because real love does not beg for permission to exist, and because you finally understood something many people spend years learning. You will never put you in a position where you must compete for basic love and commitment. So if he chooses someone else, let him choose. And if he discovers later that he lost something irreplaceable, let that lesson belong to him. Because the moment you refuse to lose yourself just to keep someone else, you become impossible to replace. One of the greatest mistakes people make after being left is believing that they must interrupt the other person's new relationship. They feel an urgency inside them. They want to remind him of the memories. They want to expose the flaws of the new woman. They want to fight for what they had. And deep down they fear that if they don't act immediately, they'll lose him forever. But what many people don't understand is that time has a way of revealing truths that emotions often hide. Because every new relationship begins with excitement. Everything feels fresh. Everything feels easy. The conversations are exciting. The flaws are invisible. The differences seem small. And when something is new, people often confuse excitement with compatibility. They convince themselves they've found something better. But excitement and permanence are not the same thing. And reality always arrives. It always does. Eventually, daily life replaces fantasy. Responsibilities return. Habits become visible. Misunderstandings appear. And suddenly what seemed perfect begins to reveal its imperfections. Not because the new person is bad, but because no relationship can survive forever on novelty alone. And this is where most women sabotage themselves. Instead of allowing life to do its work, they step in too soon. They send emotional messages. They remind him of old memories. They beg, they plead. They try to convince him that he's making a mistake. But here's the truth. You don't have to interrupt someone's fantasy. Reality is far more powerful than your arguments, because no amount of words can compete with experience. If he believes the grass is greener somewhere else, let him walk there. Let him explore. Let him discover. Not because you don't care, but because some lessons cannot be taught. They must be lived. And while he's chasing what seems exciting, your responsibility is not to sit by the window waiting for him to return. Your responsibility is to continue rebuilding your life, continue growing, continue healing. Continue becoming stronger, because your peace should never depend on someone else's confusion. Many times, people don't realize what they had until they compare it to what they thought they wanted. And comparison is impossible to avoid. Maybe one day he'll remember how peaceful your conversations were. Maybe he'll remember your loyalty. Maybe he'll miss the little things he once ignored. The way you supported him, the way you believed in him, the way you loved him without making everything a battle. And suddenly, memories that once seemed ordinary begin to shine differently. Because distance has a strange way of making people appreciate what familiarity once made them overlook. But here's the most important part. Do not spend your life hoping that reality disappoints him. Do not become obsessed with waiting for his new relationship to fail, because your healing should never be built on another person's suffering. Instead, become so focused on your own growth that whether he comes back or not no longer controls your happiness. Because if he eventually realizes that what he abandoned was more valuable than what he chased, that realization will be his lesson, not your responsibility. And if he never returns, you still win, because you refused to stop living while someone else was busy searching for greener grass. Because sooner or later, fantasy meets reality, And reality has a way of revealing the true value of what was once taken for granted. And now we come to the most important truth of all, the truth that changes everything. Because after all the silence, after all the healing, after all the lessons and the growth, there is one question you must ask yourself. What if he never comes back? Most people are afraid of that question because deep down, they believe their happiness still depends on someone else's decision. They tell themselves that they'll finally feel complete when he returns. They'll smile again when he sends that message. They'll feel valuable when he admits he made a mistake. But that way of thinking places your entire life in the hands of someone who already walked away. And no human being should have that much power over your peace. The greatest victory isn't making him regret losing you. The greatest victory is reaching a point where his return is no longer necessary for your happiness. Because something incredible happens when you stop waiting. You start living again. You wake up without checking your phone every 5 minutes. You laugh without feeling guilty. You make plans for yourself. You rediscover dreams that were forgotten. You start loving your life, not because someone chose you, but because you finally chose yourself. And strangely enough, this is the version of you that people are naturally drawn to. Not the desperate version, not the version constantly seeking reassurance, but the woman who radiates peace, the woman who enjoys her life, the woman who smiles without needing permission, because confidence is attractive, joy is attractive, purpose is attractive, and emotional independence is magnetic. Many people spend years trying to attract love without realizing that the most attractive energy comes from someone who no longer chases it. And this is where life becomes ironic, because often when you stop waiting, that's when the message arrives. That's when he starts wondering about you. That's when he notices that your world didn't collapse without him. He sees your smile. He notices your growth. He senses that you're no longer emotionally dependent on his presence. And suddenly he becomes curious again. Not because you begged, not because you competed, not because you forced anything, but because you became someone who is no longer trying to hold on to him. And people often chase what they feel they can lose. But here's the beautiful part. By the time he returns, something inside you has changed. You're no longer desperate. You're no longer afraid. You're no longer willing to accept less than what you deserve. Because healing taught you something precious. You are not waiting to be chosen. You are doing the choosing. And maybe he'll come back. Maybe he'll apologize. Maybe he'll finally realize what he lost. Or maybe life will bring someone who sees your value without needing to lose you first. Either way, you win, because your happiness no longer depends on one person. Your peace no longer depends on one relationship, and your worth no longer depends on whether someone stays or leaves. That is true power, because the moment you become genuinely happy without him, you stop chasing love and start attracting it. And that's when life gives you the greatest gift of all, the freedom to love without ever losing yourself again.